Okay, I'm Amy Killian, and this is my presentation on Martin Luther King's sermon, Why I Am Opposed to the War in Vietnam. And this is a photo of him at another anti-war protest. So for context for this sermon, this was during the Vietnam War, and the U.S. had appointed leader Diem as the Prime Minister of Vietnam. And then when the U.S. realized that the Vietnam Army couldn't defeat the Viet Cong, which was a guerrilla army, basically bad, then they started to get involved in the war. There was a Buddhist monk who self-immolated, Thich Quang Duc, and then that's when the US people started to realize that the Vietnam War wasn't necessarily something that we really wanted to be involved in, because even Buddhist monks were harming themselves. President Lyndon B. Johnson introduced the Great Society, also known as the War on Poverty, to try and help some of these efforts, as well as other global issues, and it actually sort of worked. So some of the context for the time, this is DM. In the sermon, Martin Luther King Jr.'s purpose is to express himself, which we know because in this quotation here, he uses the pronoun I a lot to express his point. In many of his other sermons, you'll see him use the word we or us to kind of create a sense of community. But in this specific excerpt, he is talking about himself and what he believes, and he's trying to explain his beliefs onto the audience. That's him speaking. His claim is in this quotation, "The time has come for America to hear the truth about this tragic war." That's a photo of the monk burning that I mentioned earlier. And in his claim, he is saying that this is a big issue that America needs to hear, and that's why he is choosing to talk about this. So, first example of ethos is him calling himself in this quotation. He's saying, "Since I am a preacher by calling." MLK is a pastor and a preacher, obviously, and in this he's trying to bring credibility to himself and say, this is why you should listen to me on this issue about war, even though he is usually a civil rights activist. He's talking about how he, in his Poor People's Campaign, he was seeing improvement in that, and then the Vietnam War came along and kind of took efforts away from that, and he's kind of expressing that he thinks that the US should get out of the war in Vietnam. And he's giving himself, like, this is why you should listen to me. Now, an example of logos in this is him pointing out how we spend $500,000 to kill each enemy soldier, and we're only spending $53 for each person classified as poor. And the big part of this is that one of these numbers is really, really large and the other is really small, which really emphasizes his point in using these numbers because there's such a drastic difference. And he's saying that we're spending so much money to kill people when we're spending so little money to help people. This is him at another march for the Poor People's Campaign that I mentioned. Another example of logos, which also doubles as an example of pathos, is when he's mentioning how we're sending our soldiers 8,000 miles away. And he's also pointing out in this, which is the pathos, that we're sending both black and white soldiers to Vietnam, where we're all fighting for the same cause, while in the United States, there's not even equality for black people amongst white people. This is a photo of him after he was stabbed in Harlem, which furthers his point, and he specifically mentions Harlem in this quotation. Now on to devices. The rule of three is used in the sermon when he is saying that all men are made in the image of God, all men are brothers, and all men are created equal. There's kind of a crescendo here, starting off with the basis of like Christianity, that we're all created in the image of God, then saying we're all brothers, and then going to the highest level that we're all created equal, which is part of his point in many of his sermons and partially in this one. Anaphora is also used in the speech, and it's used in actually two different ways in the same quotation. He's saying, but we must, and then other times he's alternating to just say, we must. And in this, he's using the pronoun we, which creates the sense of community, and he's urging people to do something and saying, we must, we must, we must, saying we must speak, we must move on. And then he's saying we must rejoice, which also brings a tone of happiness. He's trying to like rally up the crowd to agree with his point. He uses a metaphor here, saying that people have been under the curse of war for almost 3 continuous decades, and the curse of war, curse has a connotation of being like a very dark, negative thing, and he's saying that that is what war is, and furthering his point of expressing himself on why he believes that the war in Vietnam is not something that we should be a part of.
The contrast I said
He uses biblical appeal as well, and quoting Jesus directly from the Bible, saying, "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." In this context, he's using the truth as what he feels he needs to express to the people about how the war is a bad thing, and how by telling people this, it's going to help the cause or set him free. He mentions later on that his conscience was, he was being beaten up by his conscience for not talking about the war, so this is him justifying why he's talking about it. He uses simile in 2 ways in this quote. He's saying justice will roll down like waters, and righteousness like a mighty stream. He's referring to an earlier thing about, you will reap, or you will reap what you shall sow, something like that. And how if people work together and we help this cause, then we'll be rewarded by justice, equality, righteousness, etc. The tone of the speech overall is confrontational. The quote I use for this is, "We are presently moving down a dead-end road that can lead to national disaster." It's almost, on top of being confrontational, it's also warning the audience, using loaded language such as dead-end road and national disaster. He's urging for a change because he sees the decline of America being in the war. The call to action here is literally him calling on different things. He's calling on Washington, he's calling on every man and woman of goodwill, and he's saying that we need to do this now because he says tomorrow may be too late. He's saying here that we can't stay in the war, and we don't have to. It's not said by God that America is this divine force that has to police the rest of the world. He's saying that we don't have to be a part of this, and we shouldn't be a part of this. He's creating a sense of urgency. The impact and legacy of this sermon, it initially received a lot of backlash from the press. The New York Times even said he's diverting his energies and he's taking away from the civil rights movement by talking about anti-war. The U.S. continues to enter war and also attack on social safety nets such as Medicaid and Medicare. The FBI actually has a dossier about King that actually denounces him. It becomes very negative, and he's actually called a tool of American communism. And he also becomes known as an anti-war activist, which is good in theory, but then people were again saying that this takes away from his civil rights efforts and that he should stay out of it. This is a photo of him again protesting against war. In my personal reflection, I believe that civil rights and anti-war activism can exist, especially because of when Dr. King was talking about when he was discussing the Poor People's Campaign and how the war efforts were taking away from all the work on poverty, such as LBJ's Poor People or Great Society. And the speech also shows the importance of speaking up for one believes, because in this quote, King is saying he can no longer be cautious about the matter. His conscience leaves him no choice but to break the silence of the betrayals of his own silences. He's saying that if he doesn't speak on it, it'll hurt him more. It also gives perspective on media backlash, as the media was saying, oh, this makes King less reliable, he shouldn't be talking about this. But it also transfers over to contemporary conflicts, because you can kind of see this reflected in some of today's war efforts that the United States is involved in. And I feel that King would urge people today to also speak up about this. And here are my works cited. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
I have a question
for
you. So, why do you think that he faced so much backlash for his position when it ended up being a mistake that we were in Vietnam and the war?
I think that people didn't realize that yet, especially because the media was sending so much propaganda that the Vietnam War, we're doing great, we're helping these people, we're like he says that we aren't a messianic force. People didn't even start to realize that the war was a bad thing until the Buddhist monk burned himself and it was like on television. So King was kind of before everyone else realized that the war wasn't a good thing.
Mhm.
And why did you choose like this specific speech? Because I found it, interesting because a lot of people chose the other ones, and like not a lot of people chose Vietnam. So I thought it was cool that you chose Vietnam.
Thank you.
Like, what was that?
I chose this speech because I like Vietnam. Actually, I really want to go to Vietnam, and also I just remembered some context from it from APUSH, and I thought that would be helpful.
Alright, cool.
Yay, thank you
It
guys.
wasn't recording.
It wasn't recording?
I'm just kidding.
Oh my gosh.